Professor Vorex slammed his tentacle against the table, causing 30 pairs of eye stalks to swivel nervously in his direction. Listen up, you pampered Academy hatchlings. This year's xenobiology exchange program is not, I repeat, not a vacation. The classroom of senior xenobiology students at the Galactic Federation Academy shifted uncomfortably in their ergonomic hover seats. Most had never left the protective dome of their home world, let alone ventured to a death planet like Earth. But Professor whined Zalera Pex, her violet skin flushing a nervous blue. I've read that humans can snap your neck just by accident. They're practically monsters. A ripple of nervous clicks and whistles moved through the classroom. Professor Vorex rolled all 4 of his eyes simultaneously, a gesture that would have looked impressive if it wasn't so obviously practiced in front of a mirror. Dramatic as always. Pex. Yes, humans are classified as a Class 9 resilient species. Yes, they evolved on a death world. And yes, they can endure conditions that would liquidate your organs in seconds. He paused dramatically. Which is precisely why we're going to study them up close. My name is Trox Nubula. I'm recording this account because nobody would believe it otherwise. I was one of the 30 unlucky students selected for what Professor Vorex called the opportunity of a lifetime, but what I now refer to as the 3 months I spent screaming internally. Our transport ship, the Educational Endeavor, broke through Earth's atmosphere on a clear summer day. The ship's AI cheerfully announced, "Welcome to Earth. Current temperature is 32 degrees Celsius. Gravity is a bone-crushing 9.8 meters per second squared. Atmosphere is a toxic nitrogen-oxygen mix. Have a pleasant stay." Pleasant stay? Is the AI malfunctioning? Muttered my lab partner, Clara Voss, her antennae twitching anxiously. We're basically visiting a natural disaster with legs. At least we've got our protective suits, I replied, tapping my environmentally sealed xenobiology field suit. It was supposedly designed to withstand everything from extreme temperature to crushing pressure. It also made me look like a walking garbage disposal unit. But fashion wasn't exactly my priority when visiting a planet where even the microbes could be lethal. Professor Vorex addressed us as we prepared to disembark. You'll be paired with human students from their Berkeley University. Try not to embarrass our entire species, and for the love of the 7 moons, do not remove your protective gear no matter what the humans say. We filed out into the blinding sunlight of California. The human welcoming committee stood waiting, smiling with their terrifying dental arrangements. I had studied human physiology extensively, but nothing prepared me for seeing them in person, standing there in nothing but thin fabric coverings that were directly exposed to the raw elements of their hellscape planet. A tall human with curly auburn hair approached me. "Hi. I'm Tanner Martinez. You must be," he paused, squinting at his tablet, "Trox. Did I pronounce that right?" "Close enough," I replied, my translator converting my natural clicking speech into English. "Your phonetic range is limited by your primitive single-throated vocal structure," Tanner laughed. "Wow, straight to insulting human biology. We're going to get along great. I'm your buddy for the semester. Can hear." Professor Vorex had warned us about the bizarre human custom of sarcasm, but I was still trying to calculate if Tanner was genuinely pleased by my accidental insult or planning to tear my limbs off later. Our first week consisted of orientation sessions, lectures on human customs, tours of their learning facilities, and awkward social mixers where humans attempted to high-five us. Forgetting that most of us lacked the appropriate appendages, it wasn't until the second week that the real education began. "Today," announced Professor Vorex, "we observe human resilience in their natural habitat, what they call a coffee shop." The establishment called Caffeine Connection was packed with humans ingesting various stimulant-infused hot beverages. Our class huddled in a corner, trying to be inconspicuous despite being a group of aliens in protective suits. "Notice how they voluntarily consume neurotoxins," whispered Clara. "The caffeine would stop our hearts in seconds, but they drink it for fun." Tanner overheard and grinned. "You think that's wild? Watch this." He waved over his friend, a human female with short green-dyed hair. "This is Morgan Reed," he introduced. "Show them your party trick, Morgan rolled her eyes but smiled. Only for science. She took a sip of her steaming beverage, then immediately followed it with a bite from a frozen dessert product. Our entire class gasped in unified horror. She's switching between extreme temperatures in her oral cavity. Without any protective transition, shrieked Zalara. Her tissues should be rupturing. Tanner laughed so hard he snorted. You guys are adorable. That's nothing. Wait till you see what humans do for entertainment. That weekend, Tanner insisted on taking me and several classmates to what he called a friendly sports match. We soon found ourselves in a roaring stadium watching humans deliberately collide with each other at high velocities. What barbaric ritual is this? I asked, my eye stalks extended to their full length in shock. Football, Tanner replied casually, shoving something called a hot dog into his mouth. College league. Not even the professional stuff. We watched in silent horror as a human was tackled to the ground by 3 others. The crowd roared with approval. Is he dead? Whispered Calera, her chelicerae clicking rapidly in distress. Nah, just a standard tackle. He'll walk it off. Sure enough, the human stood up, shook himself like nothing happened, and rejoined the game. That impact force would have shattered my exoskeleton, muttered Zalara, who had turned a sickly shade of green. You guys think this is intense? You should see hockey, Tanner said with a wink. But the true revelation of human resilience came during an incident in the university's laboratory. We were conducting comparative biology experiments when the emergency alarm suddenly blared. Chemical spill in Section B, announced the lab safety system. All non-human species evacuate immediately. We scrambled toward the exits in panic, our protective suits automatically sealing to maximum security level. Through the transparent door, we watched in horror as a container of corrosive material shattered, splashing onto a human student named Jasper. Acid burn. Get the neutralizer, someone shouted. Jasper calmly walked to the emergency shower, pulled a lever, and stood under a torrent of water. He seemed annoyed rather than in mortal danger. His epidermis should be dissolving, Calera whispered, gripping my arm with her pincers. Why isn't he screaming in agony? Professor Vorex, who had remained inside with the humans, later explained. The human skin is remarkably resilient to brief chemical exposure. What would burn through our dermis in seconds merely causes them mild discomfort. That night in our dormitory, our class debated whether humans were actually sentient or simply too durable to have evolved higher intelligence. Why develop advanced problem solving if you can just headbutt your way through obstacles? Argued Plex, a 6-legged classmate from the methane swamps of Rigel VI. I think their resilience is precisely why they've advanced so quickly, countered Calera. They can take risks that would be fatal for us. I was considering this when an ear-splitting alarm cut through our discussion. Fire alarm. This is not a drill. All occupants evacuate immediately. Fire. The elemental destroyer that had shaped human evolution but remained an existential terror for most galactic species. Our protective suits couldn't withstand prolonged exposure to open flame. We rushed into the corridor to find it filling with smoke. Panic erupted among my classmates. Xylera began emitting her species stress pheromones, causing several nearby students to gag. Calm down, shouted Professor Vorex. Single file evacuation is practiced, but the evacuation route was already blocked by flames. Several students froze in terror, their evolutionary fear responses overwhelming rational thought. That's when the humans arrived. Tanner and several other human students came running toward the fire, not away from it. They wore simple cloth masks over their faces, laughably inadequate protection by our standards. This way, Tanner shouted, gesturing toward an alternative exit. Stay low under the smoke. Morgan appeared with a primitive fire suppression device, spraying the flames blocking our path. The humans formed a chain, physically guiding our paralyzed classmates toward safety. I watched in disbelief as Tanner ran back into the thickest smoke when he heard someone was missing. Minutes later, he emerged carrying Plex, who had collapsed from stress-induced hibernation. Outside in the safety zone, we huddled together, watching human emergency responders battle the blaze with primitive water hoses. They walked into conditions that would kill most sentient species in the galaxy. That should have killed you, I told Tanner later, after the medical team had treated him for what they called minor smoke inhalation. He shrugged. Oxygen tubes still in his nostrils. Wasn't that bad. Building's up to fire code, so it was mostly just smoke. You don't understand, I insisted, my translator struggling to convey my awe. You ran towards danger to save others. Mia, on my world, that would be considered a severe mental malfunction. Tanner smiled. That's just being human, dude. As I watched him rest, I began to understand something fundamental about humans that our xenobiology textbooks had missed completely. Their physical resilience was remarkable, yes, but their psychological resilience, their capacity to face death, to embrace risk, to value others above their own safety, and that was the truly terrifying and wonderful thing about them. And our education about humanity was only just beginning. Before I could fully process these revelations, an even more shocking demonstration of human resilience would test everything we thought we knew about this species. But that story would have to wait for another day, as Tanner was already planning our next educational experience, something called extreme rock climbing. The universe help us all. Are you absolutely certain this is safe? I asked Tanner, my voice modulator unable to hide the tremor of fear. We stood at the base of what humans casually referred to as a climbing wall, but what any reasonable species would call a vertical death trap. The artificial mountain rose nearly 30 meters high, with tiny colored protrusions serving as the only means of ascent, and Tanner finished strapping himself into a harness, a flimsy arrangement of fabric that apparently would prevent him from becoming a human pancake. Totally safe. The auto-belay system will catch you if you fall. If I what? Shrieked Zalara, who had turned such a pale shade of purple that she was nearly transparent. Professor Vorex observed from a safe distance, his data tablet recording our reactions. This exercise illustrates the human comfort with heights, a direct evolutionary result of their arboreal ancestry, he lectured, sounding far too calm about sending his students to potential doom. Our species abandoned trees 50 million years ago for very good reasons, muttered Calera, eyeing the climbing wall with all four of her optical sensors dilated in fear. Morgan, sporting a new blue hair color since yesterday, demonstrated by scaling the wall with ridiculous ease. Her five-fingered hands gripped the tiny holds, her body suspended over nothingness with casual confidence. See? Nothing to it. She called down. What happened next would become legendary in our class records. Tanner convinced 3 of our braver classmates to attempt the climb. Zorn, a gelatinous entity from the low-gravity bogs of Proxima Centauri, made it approximately 2 meters up before his pseudopods lost suction. He fell with a horrified gurgle, the safety system catching him with a jerk that sent ripples through his semi-solid form. That was amazing. Zorn. You're a natural, Tanner encouraged, helping the traumatized blob back to solid ground. I was about to politely decline my turn when a commotion from across the recreation facility caught our attention. A human child had somehow wandered onto a higher platform and was perilously close to the edge. Oh no, gasped Morgan, pointing upward. That kid's in trouble. Before any of us could process what was happening, Tanner had abandoned his harness and was free climbing up the side of the structure. No safety equipment. No auto-belay. Just bare hands and what humans call upper body strength, a concept most species in the galaxy find utterly bewildering. Is he attempting suicide? Professor Vorex asked, genuinely puzzled. We watched in collective horror as Tanner scaled the wall like some primitive animal, reached the platform, and calmly guided the small human to safety before the facility staff even arrived with emergency equipment. Did you see that? Whispered Zalara. He risked termination for an unrelated juvenile. That's not even rational evolutionary behavior. I was beginning to realize that rational was not a particularly useful concept when studying humans. The following week brought us to what Tanner called a mild outdoor excursion, but what my translator more accurately rendered as voluntary prolonged exposure to hostile wilderness conditions. A camping trip? Professor Vorex had seemed surprised when Tanner proposed it. In the unfiltered environment? Without temperature control or predator barriers. That's the whole point. Tanner had explained enthusiastically, "We'll be in Yosemite. It's gorgeous this time of year." And so, against all evolutionary self-preservation instincts, our class found ourselves in the primitive wilds of Earth, surrounded by unregulated plant growth and freely roaming wildlife. Our protective suits had been upgraded for the excursion, but the psychological comfort they provided was minimal at best. "Is that a bear?" hissed Kalara, pointing to a distant brown shape. "Nah, just a big rock," Morgan replied, casually poking at the campfire with a stick. The humans had created controlled combustion for cooking purposes and seemed entirely unconcerned about the flames licking upward into the oxygen-rich atmosphere. Night fell, bringing darkness and strange animal sounds. Our class huddled close to the campfire, even as we feared it. The humans told stories intended to frighten each other for entertainment, a bizarre practice they called ghost stories. "And when she looked in the back seat," whispered Tanner dramatically, his face illuminated eerily from below by the firelight. The hook was hanging from the door handle. The humans erupted in delighted screams while our class looked on in confusion. "I don't understand," said Plex. "If a predator was attacking their transportation pod, why not simply activate the defense protocols?" Tanner and Morgan exchanged glances and laughed. "It's not meant to be logical," Morgan explained. "It's fun to be scared sometimes." "Fun to simulate danger responses?" Professor Vorex interjected, furiously taking notes. "Fascinating psychological adaptation." The temperature dropped as night deepened. For the humans, this meant simply adding a layer of fabric. For us, it meant activating our suits' thermal regulators and silently praying to various deities that no catastrophic failures would occur. I was drifting into nervous sleep when the first raindrops hit. Within minutes, a torrential downpour engulfed our campsite. "Quick! Take cover!" yelled Tanner, helping us gather our equipment. The rain turned to hail, actual frozen water projectiles falling from the sky. Our suits could withstand it, but the psychological trauma of witnessing such atmospheric violence firsthand sent several of my classmates into protective catatonia. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that rattled my exoskeleton. "This is how it ends," moaned Sorn, who had condensed himself into his smallest possible form. But the humans? The humans were laughing. They ran through the downpour, securing equipment, rigging additional shelter, and treating the entire meteorological assault as an unexpected party game. "Isn't this awesome?" shouted Morgan over the storm, rain plastering her hair to her head. "Your definition of awesome requires serious recalibration," I shouted back. The storm intensified. What began as an inconvenience rapidly evolved into a genuine emergency as the nearby river began to rise. Our campsite, which had seemed perfectly positioned hours ago, was now in danger of flooding. "We need to move to higher ground," announced Professor Vorex, his normally authoritative voice edged with genuine alarm. "Now!" As we hastily gathered our supplies, a sound rose above the storm, a human cry for help. At the river's edge, we spotted a group of human hikers stranded on a rapidly shrinking island of rock as the water surged around them. "They'll be swept away," gasped Kalara. Without hesitation, Tanner and Morgan sprinted toward the river. They grabbed a length of synthetic rope from our supplies and began formulating a rescue plan that seemed suicidally dangerous to the rest of us. "Tanner, this is beyond foolish," warned Professor Vorex. "The current will pulverize your fragile human bone structure." "Got a better idea?" Tanner asked, already tying the rope around his waist. Besides, I was a lifeguard for 3 summers. What followed was a display of such reckless bravery that several of my classmates had to look away. Tanner waded into the rushing water, fighting the current that would have instantly swept away any of our species. Morgan anchored the rope around a tree, her muscles straining as she braced against Tanner's weight. The probability of survival is below acceptable parameters. I shouted through the rain. Acceptable parameters? Morgan yelled back, her face a mask of concentration. This isn't a math problem, Trox. Those are people out there. I watched, equal parts horrified and amazed, as Tanner reached the stranded hikers and began guiding them back through the raging water, one by one. By the time the last hiker reached safety, both Tanner and Morgan were exhausted, soaked and covered in mud, but inexplicably jubilant. That was close. Tanner laughed, as if he hadn't just defied death multiple times. As our group relocated to higher ground, I pulled Tanner aside. You realize you nearly died 6 separate times during that rescue? He shrugged, wringing water from his shirt. Wouldn't be the first time. That level of disregard for personal safety should have eliminated your species from the evolutionary ladder millennia ago, I insisted. Tanner's expression grew serious. A rare occurrence. Maybe what kept us alive was exactly that, being willing to risk everything for each other. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the night's terror had never happened. The humans seemed refreshed. While our class looked like we'd collectively aged a century. Nothing builds friendship like surviving a flash flood, Morgan declared cheerfully, cooking something called pancakes over a newly built campfire. By the final week of our exchange program, our class had witnessed humans engaging in activities from spicy food eating contests to parkour, each demonstration more bewildering than the last. But the culminating lesson in human resilience came from an entirely unexpected quarter. We were attending a human academic conference where Professor Vorex had been invited to present his preliminary findings on our exchange program. The venue was a large hotel in what the humans called downtown, a bewildering maze of vertical structures. During the midday break, our class gathered in the hotel lobby, comparing notes on the morning's presentations. That's when we heard the commotion from outside, sirens, screams, and a loud rumbling that seemed to shake the building itself. Earthquake. Someone shouted, and panic instantly erupted, for species evolved on tectonically stable planets. The concept of the ground itself becoming unstable is beyond terrifying. Several of my classmates immediately went into shock. Professor Vorex was frantically trying to herd us toward what humans call an emergency exit, when the ceiling began to crack. What happened next occurred so quickly that I can only reconstruct it from fragments of memory and the video records from our suits. The section of ceiling above Zalara gave way. In any rational universe, she would have been crushed instantly. But this was Earth, home of humans, where rationality took a permanent vacation. Tanner launched himself forward, tackling Zalara out of the way as tons of debris crashed down. Morgan and several other humans formed a human chain to pull trapped conference attendees to safety. When the dust settled, Tanner was pinned under a support beam, blood flowing from a gash on his forehead. By all galactic medical standards, he should have been deceased or at minimum in critical condition. Instead, he looked up at us and smiled weakly. Well, that was exciting. The human emergency responders freed him within minutes. The medical diagnosis was 4 broken ribs, a fractured arm, a concussion, and extensive bruising, injuries that would have meant months of regeneration therapy for any of our species. You'll be back on your feet in no time, the human doctor told him cheerfully, applying bandages and injecting primitive chemical painkillers. Our class gathered in Tanner's hospital room that evening. He was sitting up in bed, already talking about attending the conference's closing ceremony the next day. That should have killed you, said Zalara quietly. It was the phrase we'd repeated countless times during our stay, but this time it carried a different weight. Probably, Tanner agreed casually. But it didn't. Why did you do it? She asked. Risk termination for me. We're not even the same species. Tanner looked genuinely confused by the question. Because you were in danger? I didn't really think about it. Professor Vorex cleared his throat. I believe I've identified the missing element in our understanding of human resilience. It's not merely physical, but psychological. Humans don't simply survive. They consider survival a group activity. Exactly. Morgan nodded enthusiastically. We're stronger together. On our final day on Earth, as we prepared to board our transport ship, I found myself reluctant to leave. This death world with its hazardous environment and its bizarrely durable inhabitants had changed my perspective fundamentally. "You know," Tanner said as we said our goodbyes, "you guys could survive here too, with a little practice. Your protective suits are overkill." To demonstrate, he reached over and before anyone could stop him, pressed the emergency release on my helmet. Earth's atmosphere hit my respiratory system directly. I braced for the burning sensation, the toxic shock, the immediate system failure our textbooks had promised. Instead, I felt a breeze. Scented with unfamiliar organic compounds, yes, but not unpleasant. My toxicity sensors registered minimal danger levels. "See?" Tanner grinned. "Not so bad, right?" Professor Vorex was apoplectic. "Martinez, that was completely unauthorized. You could have killed him." "Nah." Tanner waved dismissively. "Your environmental analysis is way overcautious. We had your biology department run some tests. Trox can breathe our air for about an hour with no permanent damage." As my classmates looked on in shock, I took an experimental deeper breath. The sensation was extraordinary. Direct contact with a planet's raw atmosphere, unfiltered and immediate. "That should have killed me," I said wonderingly. "But it didn't," replied Tanner with a smile. "Maybe you're more resilient than you think." As our ship broke orbit, I looked back at the blue-green planet receding below. In my final report to the Galactic Federation Academy, I wrote, "Humans defy conventional evolutionary logic. Their homeworld should have eliminated them countless times over. Their bodies are objectively fragile compared to many species, lacking exoskeletons, redundant organs, or significant regenerative capabilities. By all reasonable metrics, they should have perished or remained primitive. Instead, they've turned their greatest evolutionary disadvantage into their defining strength. Humans don't simply endure adversity, they run toward it. They don't merely adapt to hostile conditions, they actively seek them out for recreation. Most bafflingly, they willingly risk personal extinction to preserve others, even members of entirely different species. The textbooks classify humans as Class 9 resilient, but this quantitative measure fails to capture their essential nature. They are not merely durable. They are, in a word, indomitable. And perhaps most terrifying of all, they're teaching the rest of us to be the same. Professor Vorex gave my report the highest possible grade, with a single comment appended, worryingly accurate. The following semester, the Academy announced an expanded exchange program with Earth. The waiting list of applicants stretched into the thousands. I signed up immediately, this time as a teaching assistant. After all, some lessons in resilience are worth risking everything to learn, and Tanner had promised to teach me something called skydiving. That will definitely kill me. But somehow, I'm looking forward to it.